Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking about your and our best advice for dealing with teenagers.
Dealing with teenagers. I have two now. I have two. I have a
also
newly
have two.
minted.
That's
right. Good.
I've
You're
out
so
the
old.
other side. Right, exactly. Hard as that might be to believe, they do eventually get spit out of that water slide into young adulthood. Yeah.
I feel like that's the good news, really.
Yeah. And it's pretty good, I got to say, so far.
I like that.
Something.
So you've survived a full teenagedom.
Yes. And I now I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old and then one older. And how about you? How old are your teenagers?
Well, I still have an 11-year-old and then I have 13 and 14. So we're just 13, creeping 14, 15, into 18.
It. This is good because we got 13, 18.
We got everybody. We got everybody.
And wouldn't you agree that 13 and 18 really deserve separate episodes?
Exactly. They have
not
nothing
the same
in common.
Thing.
Nothing
they sound
in common.
But we'll try to cover the waterfront today.
And one of the things I think that's real, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, that like the range of experiences are really different too. Like I know 13-year-olds who are dealing with what I would call like real teenage stuff, like parties and drugs and drinking and like all the big ticket items. I don't know, immature, sheltered, whatever. Like my teens are young teens. Like they are still like, their idea of a great Friday night is like getting McDonald's and being allowed to play video games. And so I think there's a huge range of teenage experiences too.
Yes, I have, I would say sort of a combination. You would think if you watch Gossip Girl or whatever, that just like Manhattan is just this sort of
party
Gomorrah
central
of craziness. And it
Gomorrah.
isn't. You would be surprised. These kids are more sheltered in certain ways. And of course, we don't have to worry about drunk driving in Manhattan. I mean, at least of our kids, heaven forbid the taxi driver is sober.
Well, it's funny because I remember getting to college and I had grown up in the suburbs of New York, but like New York City was our spot. I went to school in New York City and the really wild kids freshman year of college were like this country mice. Like they had just been like up to, I don't know, like somehow like they just would wander out to some like yard in the middle of nowhere and just get crazy as teenagers in a way that just was not familiar to me at all.
Let me pull something from my spouse's own past. When in his teenage years, he liked to go what they called back the sack, which was a field. And we grew up in the same town. I was not hanging out back the sack.
You weren't invited to back the sack?
No, I was not. I was going to debate tournaments, no lie. Yeah. And he was going back the sack, which was just a field with a bonfire and, a couple cases of beverages.
Yeah, that's right. We definitely have like the woods in our town and like there's definitely a shed somewhere that stuff is going on. And I would say that my kids have the blessing of nerddom in that they are not too challenged. I mean, I always say that because I was so unpopular in high school. You really have to be popular to struggle with a lot of the struggle issues, which are like, people don't offer you drugs when you're like a super nerd in high school. True. Like it just didn't come up a lot for me because I never got invited to any parties. And in a lot of ways, I'm very grateful for that. And I'm trying to replicate that for my own kids. And it's not even that I'm trying that hard. They're doing fine at being nerds themselves, but it's definitely, I think it can be easier when you have kids who are not living in the fast lane.
Yes, it can. And if you're listening right now with like your baby on your hip thinking like, la, 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 I don't want to know any of this stuff. It's going to be okay. We're walking you through some good advice today. And I want to segue to the first one because I feel like it's relevant. Darren says her best advice for dealing with teenagers is to keep your face in check. This is great.
I in our notes, I flagged this for you because I know that you've had some facial problems with your children.
I'm the opposite of poker face. I reveal too much. Yeah. Like I reveal what I'm thinking. And so, but I have learned this. Darren says, whether your kids just told you something ordinary or they told you something outrageous or they told you something outrageous about a kid who you've known since they were 3, like whatever it is, your face and your voice need to stay calm. Darren says big reactions will shut down conversations and keep your kids from coming back. I'm practicing this right now.
Agree, but I'm terrible at this. I mean, I really am. And I want my kids to be able to tell me anything, but I do tend to go insane when they tell me things, which is counterintuitive. But I think that my husband is better. I think if you have a spouse in the home and you can tag team this, like, it's different skills for different. I mean, I think that my kids are afraid of me, which has its upsides.
Yeah.
And then not afraid of their dad, which has upsides too. I mean, that's way too simplistic, but I think that, like, if they wanted to talk about something, they would go to their, I think we have, as I've often said on the podcast, a gender stereotype reverse marriage. And yeah, they are more comfortable talking to their dad, but they know that the hammer will come all the way down if they step out of line with me.
If you are sort of we talk about being the askable parent, right? Which means in terms of like, yeah, like I'm here if you have any questions. This is a little bit different, I think. Like I'm learning that this is a way in. My kids will come home and tell me about big things that are happening to sometimes their friends, sometimes just kids they know. Like so-and-so almost got kicked out of school because they did this. So-and-so had to be taken from, a party in an ambulance to the hospital and they're going to be okay. But, and these are also the times when you have to keep your face like very still and then use that as the way in, because you will be surprised. Like, oh, I didn't think I would be talking about this with my freshman, but I guess we are now. And you have to just use those opportunities to be like, okay, so let's talk about what would happen if this were you. What would I want you to do? Because otherwise, I mean, you don't want to wait until it's happening to your kid, obviously, but you also don't want to be like, what? Well, that
outrageous,
would never happen in our
shocking.
house. Like, yeah, like it could happen. Like no judgment towards the kids who are having
anything
struggles.
could happen. And
right.
that, I think 2 points. One, I did a show a long time ago, comedy show, and I used to have a bit about how my parents and I communicated when I was a teenager. And it was that they would be like, they would try to find out kind of what was going on by being like, this was their question. What percentage of the kids in your class are smokers? You know, I mean, I feel like
you've told me
now
this.
they vape,
This is a good
you
one.
know?
Yeah. With vaping, right. Insert vaping.
But back in our day it was smoking. And that basically my answer would clue them into my interest level in doing that activity. So I would be like, having a beer at a party, I would say like 70% of kids are doing that, meaning like I'm also kind of
You're
thinking
70%
about doing
okay
it or participating in it. But if they're like, how many kids in your class are doing IV drugs? I'd be like, oh, like 2%, like almost nobody. They would be like, okay, that's way out of bounds. And it was like this funny communication system that we had that was a little bit off the subject, but it allowed us to talk about things in a way that helped them gauge a little bit where I was with stuff.
I love that.
Yeah, it was useful. It was real useful.
Missy, this is another one that I know to be true and I can't always do it. Missy says, when you're in the car with your teenagers and their friends, keep your ears open and your mouth shut. You learn a lot. Such good advice when I'm driving my teenagers and their friends around. I'm so fond of these kids, particularly if they're kids you've known since, like we were saying before, since they were 3. I have a hard time not being like, oh, I know, and like I'm so happy for you, and you got a scholarship, and oh my gosh, it's so exciting. What do you think you want to major in? I want to chat with them while they're in my car, but the better thing to do is just be silent chauffeur and let the conversations unspool. I agree with this.
I'm another step wrong from you, which is I want to scold them about their creepy behavior and be like, who just left a wrapper in my back seat? Like, I need to make some adjustments before teendom. I have my 11-year-old is throwing a little gathering for her friends, and her only ask was that there be no adults around because adults ruin everything. And I was like, yeah, that's a no from me because I'm not having unchaperoned 11-year-olds over. But I was sort of like, we will just, I did say, we will be a presence, like coming in and out and filling up bowls of things, but we won't sit in like a line of chairs just watching for faults. Like, right. Oh, your foot's over the line right there.
Right.
And it was a funny kind of revelation, the way she explained it, that my presence would ruin it. And I get it because I do run a very, very tight ship that is probably too tight sometimes. And like, you want them to be able to have fun and let loose and be a little bit naughty. And if you're just there like calling every foul, it's not that fun.
Or even saying like, hey, girls, right? Or even being like, cool, mom.
Being fun mom.
Right. We just had my youngest had most of her 8th grade class over to our house for a reunion. That sounds like a lot of people. It wasn't. She had a tiny 8th grade class. So let's say it's going to be like 25 kids. And we also, because we live in an apartment building, have a party room, like a place you can rent for parties. Of course, it's not supposed to be, again, unsupervised 14-year-olds. So I had this agreement with her that my husband and I would take turns, coming into the party. And I only found out later that, because my husband was sort of like, I'm running out of things to say. I'm like, what are you saying? Like, when it was my turn, I was going down with a roll of paper towels that was not strictly required and wiping a counter that did not strictly need to be wiped, right? And keep like one half of one eye on what was happening in the next room and then leave. And he was going down when it was his turn because he didn't understand the assignment and was like, so what's going on? Like, hey, so what's up?
How's it going, ladies?
How's that movie? Anybody scared?
Creepy.
Yeah. So I was like, no, you're not. You're supposed to have an excuse
Stop
to walk
talking.
in. Right. Stop talking.
Yeah. And be a little bit like, leave room for the Holy Spirit, as they used to say in our days to the kids who were a little too close together.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think overall, the theme of teenage dumb is letting go a little bit, right? Like these kids who have been in your life and you've been strapping them in and like literally feeding them and then feeding them whatever you choose and being at the table. And it is this thing of letting that line go out farther and farther and farther. But you still have this very important role in helping them make the right decisions. I mean, it's a very tough time because of that, because you're like, on the one hand, I want you to feel this sense of independence. On another hand, I don't want 14-year-olds unsupervised and doing nonsense.
Right. So I'll be there sometimes. I'm there in case you need me. It's sort of, you're floating. You're like Patrick Swayze in Ghost. You're just sort of available if anybody needs you.
I have mentioned this advice of my mom's before. I very much adhere to it, but tell me what you think of it. She was always team, set the rules tighter than you actually want the kids to behave.
Yeah.
I think it can be right, and then sometimes I think it can go wrong in that I definitely know kids who were raised in, I will say usually strict religious households with like very, very strident rules, who kind of busted out Hulk-like from those rules and went crazy. Like, I don't think you want to be like, you may never use a curse word until you're 25. Like, you have to keep it tight but not suffocating, and then understand that like, okay, they're going to go outside of what you want a little bit.
Yeah, you have to allow that to happen. I mean, it's no fun being a teenager if you don't pull something over on your parents. But if that pulling something over, that's why you keep it tight, right? Like, I actually don't care if they stay out until 11:30 instead of 11.
Yeah.
Even if you give them a little like, I noticed what time you came home, young lady. Like, a little bit of that is sort of part of your job too. Like, you're both playing a part in that.
Yeah, and I think especially much more so for our generation, I think it is harder for our generation and the generations below us, for whom being, maybe this isn't true because maybe parents in the 60s felt this too, but like being cool and like hip and like not square was very important, that it can be hard to find yourself in the role of like, young man, you will not use that language in this house. Like, wait a minute, how did I become? I feel like I was sneaking beer into the party 2 days ago. Like, how am I suddenly the person who's like, that will not stand in my house? But I think you got to be able to make that turn.
Yeah. They probably have less of a hard time seeing you as the authority figure than like I'm cool, mom. Like, I'm cool and funny and clearly like just one of you. Like, no, they're very clear that you are not. So.
No problem seeing me as the uncool mom, but I do have some problems seeing myself as the uncool mom.
That's exactly what I was trying to say.
All right, more advice for teenagers after this.
I think this is good advice from Jennifer. Jennifer says that parents of teenagers should remember that it's better for them to fail in life when they still live at home and have us to help them through it. I need to learn this right now because I have somebody who's getting ready to leave for college, and there's so much paperwork and things you sign up for and placement tests and did you do your roommate form and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did you do this? Did you? And I'm trying to back off and tell myself, like, if you don't get the roommate request form in on time, like they will come looking for you. You will get an email, something's missing. Like you have to let them miss a deadline within reason. You see what I'm saying? Not like
for sure,
not send the check in or whatever, but something little ways they can not quite make the mark and then be like, oh shoot, I guess I better pay closer attention next time. They need to do that while they're still living with you.
100% right. Also, I think that for the person listening with the kid on their hip, like this is a process that starts very young, like letting them fail and letting them make mistakes and figure out their own way. There was, recently the story in the news about this plane that crashed in the Amazon and these 4 little kids survived,
Yes, because one of them had been taught survival skills, I heard. I didn't really...
Yeah, I think so. But I think the oldest kid was like 12 or 13, like quite young. And one of the kids was a baby, And listen, you're not teaching your kids to survive that. That's not it. But I do think that sometimes we think like, oh, the process of independence starts at college, and it really doesn't. Like it starts with, I'm going to take my bike into town with my friends. And I recently had the experience where I was driving around and saw my kid and her friend in town doing something vaguely against the rules, very vaguely. It was small, but I came later that night at dinner. I was like, hey, I heard that you were blah, 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 blah in town. And I mean, saucer eyes, but I always like to play into the image of like, I'm everywhere. Like I will always fight. So you have all this independence, but if you get up to shenanigans, I'm going to find out and you're going to be in trouble. And that's going to mean something to you.
They do have to learn this stuff. And the handing over and the giving them more responsibility, at least in my case, I'm talking about an 18-year-old, not a 13-year-old, older teenagers. It's been successful for me with each of my 2 older teenagers to be kind of honest about this. Like when it's like, you didn't hand this form in, you were supposed to, well, I thought you were going to remind me. It's like, you're right. You're right. Up until now, it's always been mom just handles this stuff. Mom will remind you. We're moving into a new thing, so we're going to have to figure out a new way of doing things. So what do you think? And then put the plan on them. But don't be, don't just immediately be indignant. Like, well, what's going to happen when you go to college? Like, they're right. You were, wiping their behinds, and at some point you're stopping doing that, and they need visibility on that as older teenagers.
And I think some of the conversations that we have, people kind of roll their eyes out of like, we'll include kids in the decision. And, people get very like, tweet about the whole like, well, 4-year-old, what are your feelings? And how can we help you help yourself? Like that kind of style and language, I get why people roll their eyes at it. But I do think as you go along and being able to have conversations where you say, well, we're going to go away. I would like to leave you at home. Here are the kind of choices that I expect. And the thing is, if you have people over unsupervised, then we can't do this again. It's a drag for you because you won't have any independence. And it's a drag for me because I really want to go away. So what does that look like? And what do those choices look like? And I do think that these are the conversations that build from the time they're quite young, is being able to say, here's what you want. Here's what I want. Where's the center of those two things? And how do we get there together versus respect my authority, never question, because you don't want them to just suddenly like throw everything you've ever said off and be like, I reject one piece of this and therefore I reject everything this person ever has to say.
Right. The whole system is broken.
Yeah.
Laura says teens have big feelings about things we might find trivial. Let them have those big feelings. This is a good one.
This is hard for me too, to not be like, this doesn't matter. It's not interesting. This episode,
things that are true, but also very hard for us.
I know it is though. Like, I I was definitely raised in an Irish Catholic family where like, you know, a ton of like emotionality and indulgence in our feelings was not paramount. And I definitely struggle with it still. Like, this is not a reasonable reaction to this. This is this level of drama that we're creating. And, you know, teens do a lot of things that you can see through, right? It's like, Mom, you're so great. I'm like, what do you want? How much money? Like, you know, I kind of skip right past. It's not like I'm playing at a much higher level than they are, frankly. And I can see through some of the nonsense that they're doing. And it is often my instinct to be like, cut it out. I know what you're doing. Sometimes it's like, you got to let it breathe a little bit. And I definitely do struggle with, you've got to let it breathe. But also I would say I've had a couple of instances with my kids where, as I say that, I do not like emotionality. The flip side of not liking emotionality is that I have trouble disappointing kids. Like when my kids are really emotional because I'm like, you cannot do this thing that I know is a bad idea for you, or you must do this thing that I know is a good idea for you, and they cry, I definitely have an instinct to be like, never mind, let's just skip it. And I find that the older they get, the harder that is. Their emotions seem really real, and it seems really mean to hurt their feelings, and it's hard.
Sure, like a 13-year-old in tears is just every Tuesday, right? And an 18-year-old in tears is a little bit less frequent.
But like a 4-year-old in tears is like, right, okay, fine. Even a 13-year-old in tears, I find that like those teens get into those really like racking sobs. And even though it's like, you really can't fight their battles for them, but it is hard. Like, it's not dismissible. It's not dismissible to be like, Stacy is an idiot and we don't care about her opinions. But when you see the kid crying, both I'm like, Stacy's a moron, who cares? And I'm going to go burn Stacy's house down myself. You know, that's the problem. I'm sort of sucked in on both sides.
That's the other mistake that I think sometimes parents of teenagers make is like, is overcorrecting in the like, yes, of course I take your things seriously. Like, she just texted you again. What did she say now? Right. Like every text has to be parsed. Like you don't dismiss it as relationships are stupid and someday my child will understand and you don't have real problems. But on the other hand, you don't engage with the minutia of who said what to who in the same way that they do. You've got to give them a little bit of a remove. You got to give them a longer view, neither dismissing it nor living every moment of it with them.
Yeah, and I think especially with teenagers, it's like you're the hearth keeper in a way. Like you have created hopefully a home and a set of values and a loving space, and you're letting them like wander farther and farther from it, but you want them to like be this space to come back to, you know?
Or as Posey says, they're net to fall into.
They're net to fall into.
You're not fighting the fight, but if they fall off the edge, you're the net, right? You're more passively available.
I think passively available is a really good way to say it and a really hard thing to do. Especially Marin says, I mean, she uses the term soiling the nest, which you've used many times, that there is a psychological concept that kids who are anxious about leaving home, which, spoiler alert, is every kid.
Sure.
They tend to be like, this place stinks. I never liked it here. Their feelings are complicated around leaving home. And so they try very specifically to make home a place where they don't want to be, or define it as like a bad place so that they don't feel as bad leaving.
Guess who else does this? The parents of the teenagers who will still be leaving. We also, there's a psychological thing that we do. We're also like, I can't wait. Like, can't come soon enough, September. Let's go. You are out of they're driving me nuts. Like, I can't wait. And you don't mean it. And you'll still cry that day when you drive away. But that feeling that you have, like, this needs to just happen already, is coming from both sides, really.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Camille says, never forget that any I hate you statements really mean I'm scared and I don't know what to do with these feelings. Don't take it personally. It can be very lonely if you do. I need to work on this, Amy.
This is another one. This is very, Camille, I'm going to use this one. I hate you. And just here in my head, I'm scared and I don't know what to do with these feelings. That's a really good replacement. Because I hate when people say, don't take it personally. They just said, I hate you, like something personal.
Of course you take it personally. Like someone told you they hate you. Yeah.
Right. It isn't like he's yelling at the dog and I'm taking it personally. He's yelling at me and he's saying you were awful. Of course you take it personally. Like, what does that even mean? But I understand this idea that you can replace what they are saying with what they mean.
The other thing I want to underline here, because I think that this is so important, and this is the conversation that I'm having with a lot of my friends as our kids really get into teenagedom, is boundary seeking behavior, which is another one of my mom's terms. But basically that kids are actually looking for boundaries, and that it can sound kind of in contrast to everything else we've said, but it's so important that kids are pushing boundaries and they want to feel them. And so I would say that saying I hate you to me is unacceptable in my house. And so I have to watch how I react to it. I can't be like the top that explodes, but I would say I'm not having a conversation with someone who says that to me. Go upstairs, or I'm going to go into my room and we can discuss this later when you're calmer. But I am not allowing someone to say I hate you to my face in my home. It is not happening. And so you're not getting what you want out of this conversation. And there are some consequences to saying I hate you to me, because I really do think that kids are like hitting that tripwire, because in some ways they want to understand that you're really still in charge.
Yes.
And that if you keep moving the boundaries back every time they hit them, kids feel very insecure. Like they want a weighted blanket thrown over them, which is your rules.
Right.
And they want to know that like they can't get away with things, because it's their job to push and it's your job to be the wall they're pushing against.
Remember the ADHD dude was talking about the sort of argument vortex, and he was saying specifically kids with ADHD are really turned up for arguments. It's a little hit of dopamine. But I think this is really true for any adolescent, that the kid is like, I hate you. When you could respond to that with a like, you will not talk to me, but then you're feeding the fire. If you instead say what you said, or Laura suggested you say, I did not deserve that. Can you try again, please? But you keep it calm, that you're not entering the argument with them. You're still remaining a distance from it. That's what not taking it personally, I'm realizing, means. It's not trying to convince them, like, how could you say that when I'm the one who did this? I need to change your mind about this right now. No, you don't. You just need to say, hey, we're not doing that. That's not taking it personal. We're not
doing that. I think that's right. And I think it can be hard, and I have done it, and friends of mine have done it, when the lines get totally mowed over. Listen, this is harder with kids with certain special needs. This can be much harder with kids with ADHD. Yeah. It can be much harder with kids on the spectrum. And let's just say, we're not just saying that. It can be much harder.
Right.
It can be harder with kids who've had trauma and loss. There are a lot of things that make these issues much harder for teens. But I think there is always a back to one to be had here, where you can say, listen, there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of frustration, and our relationship feels out of control to me. And I have had this with one of my kids where I'm like, I have lost the script. This kid is always raging. I'm always throwing gasoline on the fire. The minute he starts raging, I'm grabbing the gas can and running in and being like spraying it everywhere. And we're both just burning up every day. And I have said to myself, to my spouse, to my child, this has gotten out of control and we need to reset. We need to spend, and it doesn't take long, we need to spend 2 weeks saying boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. We're not going to allow this kind of talk. We're not going to allow hysteria in the house. And here's the thing. When it stops working, it stops happening. And that is very encouraging.
Yeah. And it's an opportunity to get on the same side of the net with your kid. And the problem is, like, we seem to be fighting a lot, and there's a lot of stress, and this is a stressful time, but you're with them. And I have had success with, you can't do that with every problem, with every teenager, but overall I have had success with, like, this feels like we've gotten off path, and how do you suggest we do this? It works better than, young man, understand one thing. I mean, when that stops working, try the same side of the net instead.
Absolutely. I have one more thing to say about that. We'll be right back.
Christine says, you might be surprised by the grief you feel as teenagers grow into themselves. Give yourself space to feel your feelings, but don't make it their problem.
Oh, this is really right and true. And I think for some of my kids who, you know, especially when they're little, and I feel like we all think we're so smart, and I would have conversations like, you'll never be the teen who hates me, ha ha, with my like little cuddly 8-year-old. Spoiler alert, they are. Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard. Like, I do feel like we think we're going to be immune to some of these things, and like we're too cool and with it and hip to have kids who hate us. They're supposed to. It's developmentally appropriate. Skip this phase at your own peril for sure. And you can't outsmart it. You can't outrun it. You can't go over it. Can't go under it. Only way is through it.
Yeah. Lawrence Steinberg said in his book, Crossing Paths, which I read recently, that's why I keep talking about it, but that their needs for connection to you change. And what's painful is that your needs haven't changed. You even really haven't changed.
Exactly.
I still have the same taste in clothes I did 3 years ago. It's just 3 years ago, it was really fun to go shopping with my kid, and now it's not, because everything I pick is super, super stupid. And I'm like, how did I lose? I've lost my touch? No, I haven't lost my touch. It's just what mom thinks is now very, very low on the totem pole.
Kids cannot grow into like happy, sustainable adults without going through some sort of cleaving. Cleaving, the only word in the English language that means one thing and the opposite of that thing. Cleaving can mean coming together or coming apart. I'm talking about breaking apart. And I think it can be helpful. A pediatrician told me when I had a colicky baby, crying is the only exercise that an infant gets. So whenever they're crying, think of like, oh, here they are. They're working out their lungs. They're getting their exercise. How great. It doesn't work really, but it's just a little mind reset. And I think that cleaving is the exercise of teenagedom is a phrase that helps me in terms of like when I'm being told I'm dumb or getting the door slammed in my face. And again, I don't allow nonsense I don't allow myself to be disrespected in my house, and I'm not going to. But some of the like, we don't want to include you, we want to include dad, or some of the things that might hurt my feelings, I do try to be like, oh, look, it's cleaving here right on schedule. And they're doing the important work that is going to make us close as adults. Mm-hmm. They're cleaving. And I think that what happens is we get an instinct to stop that, to control it, and that we have to fight against that. Mm-hmm. Danielle says, and this really spoke to me because I'm struggling with this and it was something I had to like do a full reset on. Save all your energy for nighttime. I'm an early rising morning person, but without fail, my teens always want to dump their most intimate secrets as I'm ready to fall asleep. Learn from my mistakes. Despite what they say about these being awful times, it's nice to have some time to yourself when you feel you've gotten over the hump. I think that it's like post-school, what is it, Amy? You know the term.
After-school restraint collapse.
After-school restraint collapse that our ADD guy told us too. There's a nighttime like deregulation effect, right? That sometimes the half an hour before bed is the time that you'll get like the big tantrum and the big breakdown.
Right.
Seems very familiar to me. I don't know about you. So two sides of this. One is that sometimes you have to kind of read it. Like, yes, that can be a good time for connection and finding out what's really going on. But I also think sometimes it's a good time for like throwing yourself in the lava and both of you burning up. So I think you have to be a little bit careful about night times in terms of when they are productive conversations, great. But if they are not productive conversations, sometimes it is just time to go to bed.
Right. And I would say be available. It's this passively available thing, I think. Like, you never know when your teenager is all of a sudden going to start to unburden themselves or start to be like, okay, so remember I told you about this, and they have a long story for you, and you were maybe supposed to leave for the dentist 5 minutes ago, but those things come when they come, and they pick the strangest moments, and I try to always be like, oh, I'm in it. They need me. Stop what you're doing, give them your full attention. And for me, it's not always late at night. I will say it's not in the morning. My oldest kid, post-teenager, is home for the summer, has an internship. that has him getting up early in the mornings, and I'm up early in the morning, so I've been sitting with him. He's not really in the mood for talking. It's not personal. It's not me. He just can't really talk yet at 7:45 in the morning. But I'm around, and one of these mornings he's going to be like, "Remember I told you about my friend?" And you just have to be sort of ready for it, I think.
Yeah, somebody made the point a long time ago. Anytime you're not having eye contact is a good time for a conversation. Driving a car with your back to them while they're cooking, like that can be an easier time to have a conversation, not when you're like kind of staring them down like, what? Give me every detail. Like passive conversation is good. We had a lot of people point out like giving kids a system to get out of bad situations, texting an X, having a code word, whatever it happens to be. I think that's a great way to give kids power in situations, giving kids carte blanche or like get out of jail free cards around certain things. Like you're never going to be in trouble if it's something that's going wrong and I can help you with it. And starting to figure out conversations around these more adult topics, which is text me an X and I will come and be like, grandma's in the hospital. We have to go right now. Whatever it is, I will get you out of the situation if you text me an X. And also setting some understanding around you're never in trouble if you call me for help, I think can be a really good place to go, so that you're really saying like, okay, you got in the car and then you realize somebody had too much to drink, like whatever it is, you call me, I will get involved in this situation. And like, you can call for a get out of jail free because you're calling for help.
Right. Because your safety is more important. Michelle Eichard, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to our fresh take that we did with her. She wrote a book called 14 Talks by Age 14.
Yes.
Very good. And I think it was Michelle that said, and I thought this was such good advice, if you have that uncomfortable conversation, if you need to talk about porn, if you need to talk about, being sexually active, whatever it is there going to be alcohol at this party, that the car is a great place to do it because there's a built-in ending, or I don't know, an elevator ride, whatever, that you sort of say on the way. So I want to talk to you about this, and I know it's a little uncomfortable. We're going to talk about it, but you're together with them in a situation that has a built-in end zone. Like between now and when my mom is going to drop me off at school, she wants to talk to me about vaping, but I know it's a 5-minute ride to school, and that those are sort of perfect times for both of you to have tricky conversations.
And I will say from the future, someone is showing your kid porn before you talk to them about porn. Someone is vaping around your kid before you feel like having the vaping conversation. Yes. Someone is doing one of your kid's friends is sexually active before you've had the sex talk with them. Yes. And it is hard to get ahead of these things. And there is never a day where you wake up and you're like, you know what I really want to talk to my 11-year-old about today? Porn. It's not going to happen. Right. That day is not coming. And so you really have to, and I do think one very easy entree is use my parents' trick is like, gosh, we got a letter from the high school and they're already talking about porn in high school and you're only in 5th grade. Like that seems crazy. Or they're already talking about it in middle school. And like, it seems crazy to me, but it's out there. You can put it way out in a field somewhere and talk about it very kind of, this is something I'm hearing about
over there. Right.
Like, are any of your weird friends watching porn? And what are you going to do if they show it to you? Like, if you put it right on your kid, they're going to be much less likely to take it than if you can kind of put it out in a field and be like, yeah, this is odd that this is going on. What would you do if that happened? And make it more theoretical.
Amy, not me, different Amy. This sounds like good advice. I'm not sure I understand it, but I think it's good advice. With teenagers, Amy says, you should be the thermostat, not the thermometer. That sounds so sage, but what does that mean exactly? Do you know?
I think it means that you are not there to be like, you're doing this, you're doing that. I'm observing and judging everything you're doing, and I'm recording in a scientific way. Like, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. You're helping them to self-regulate. I believe that's the translation.
All right.
That like instead of, I think that's right. And I think that that's where I struggle with teenagers to some degree is like, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. I know what you're up to. I see what you're doing. And that in fact, I need to be like, you seem to be having a hard time. How can I help you adjust that? And so I think that is very, very good teenage advice.
We've had tons of good advice in this episode. I'm going to put the link in the show notes to the actual Facebook thread, because this and so many of our topics come from our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/whatfreshhellcast. We talk about all kinds of funny, serious, and in-between stuff, and it's a great group to be a part of.
If you want even more What Fresh Hell, you can sign up for What Fresh Hell Plus. We have an ad-free feed for all of our episodes, all of our back catalog. We do bonus episodes every single month. And you can sign up by visiting our website, whatfreshhellpodcast.com, and clicking on the little picture that says What Fresh Hell Plus.
I'll also put the link in the show notes for that in case that's too much trouble. You can just click the link wherever you're listening.
Let's make it easy as possible. Sign up for What Fresh Hell Plus for even more What Fresh Hell. And with that, thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
So long.